Hello and welcome back to Wales, or rather, welcome back to the Kingdom of Cymru. That's right, our name has in fact changed. After about 4 hours after I uploaded the previous video in this series, the creator branch of the game got updated and a lot of changes were made. The most visible for me immediately was that my country was renamed to the Kingdom of Cymru, and my flag became the Golden Dragon of Glyndŵr. My map color remained grey, but hey, you can't really get everything, can you? A couple of things before we get into the 17th century. Firstly, I want to say thank you to all the people who have been letting me know that they've been enjoying this AAR. The support I've been getting has been genuinely heartwarming, and hearing people say that they're really into my narrative style has been a little bit of an ego boost, so thank you very much for that. Secondly, if you're enjoying it and haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel. And thirdly, if you are not against pre-ordering games, in the description and pinned comment I have an affiliate link that will bring you to the Paradox store where you can pre-order EU5, give you a Steam key, and I get a cut of the sale. It's a great way to support the channel. Now, without further ado, Cymru. In the last video, we completed our conquest of Britain. England became an Exodus tag based in Quebec, and we started our own colonization efforts in the Americas, securing 3 colonies in Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, and Massachusetts. Naturally, we renamed them all to Camau-Sintaf, Alban Nuith, and Gogledd Dyffryn. Look, the pronunciations, it's rough. It's rough out here, I'm sorry. Sweden owned everything south of Massachusetts up until Georgia, which was owned by Castile, who also owned much of the Caribbean. I couldn't yet see all of the islands, but they had 100% control over Cuba, Haiti, Jamaica, and Puerto Rico. In our latest war against England, Castile had joined against us and part of a sizable coalition, so we knew that while their navy was slightly out of date, they were immensely powerful and definitely still had the edge over us. England had stopped being a valid rival after we banished him, so we set Castile up as our rival, and the game said that we were a fair bit weaker than them. Hovering over it, I got a bit more of a detailed breakdown. 83 land strength versus 127, 56k max manpower versus 90, 22k regulars versus 37, 1200 income versus 1700, 3.5 million pops versus 10.5 million, 132 naval power versus 353, 53 ships versus 301. Yeah, look, they kind of had the edge over me in basically every area, though we did have one single thing in our favor. We had more maximum sailors than they did. 69,000 versus 50,000. That would definitely make the difference, but we did need to fleet up again. One of the things that I realized in the last part was that culturally, we really needed to step up our game, as our influence was hampered hard by being so heavily over our cultural capacity, nerfing it by 25% at this point. This led us to being forced by France, our long-term ally, to start using French in our court rather than our native Brythonic. The first thing we did then was to spend 20 stability to return Brythonic to our courts, as I was sick of having the noblesse estate, and much preferred the Uchelwyr. Again, pronunciations, it's on point. Unfortunately, that didn't change the court languages of our vassals, which were now either French or English. So we unpaused, and I was hit with the very first of the most visible changes in the update we got, another nerf to Diplo capacity. Beforehand, my 6 Diplo cap was perfectly reasonable and capable of handling my vassals, colonies, and alliance with France, which, to be perfectly honest, had kind of outgrown its usefulness, but now with the update, things had changed. We jumped up to 7.91 cap used, which tanked our subjects' loyalty and made 10 of our 12 vassals disloyal, only Norfolk and Ireland remaining loyal. France, though, was taking up 2.5 cap on their own, and it was time to say goodbye. It would be impossible to get another ally, though, as everyone had a negative 1,000-something modifier for desire to ally due to the fact that I was likely the target of a coalition. With the vassals once again loyal, I began the integration process, first with Oxford. For some reason, the weights for urbanizing the previous version of the game were maybe a little bit overtuned, and you'll probably remember me talking about Chester being full of towns. Oxford was the same. Of the 11 locations they owned, 8 were upgraded to towns. Amusingly, Birmingham wasn't one of them, though. While looking at the location rank map mode, I noticed something else. England, before I'd conquered them, had made 3 cities in Grantham, Lincoln, and Grimsby. Personally, I think I wouldn't have upgraded any, bar maybe Grimsby, to a city, as it had sand as its RGO where the other 2 had food trade goods. But I wasn't going to sniff at it. With the 3,000 I had in the back pocket, I began the construction of a light fleet to replace the one I lost fighting Castile, and then I noticed that my fleet, which was currently stationed in port in Dublin, was taking attrition because of a storm that had recently wreaked havoc through the Irish Sea. It was cool to see that even if a navy is docked, it will still take some punishment from these environmental factors. Each of the lights, which were pinnaces by now, would cost 160 ducats, so I was only able to commission 15 of them, and this would definitely be a process that I would focus on going forward. My vassal of Galloway had a civil war, and I got to see the implementation of the changes that my Wales game had spearheaded, as I had to wait 12 months before I, as the Overlord, could intervene. And when I did so, I was surprised to see that I then had the ability to choose which of the parties I would intervene on behalf of. This time I backed the original Earldom of Galloway, but I could have chosen the Gallovidian clergy if I wanted a religious vassal. As soon as the war was won, Galloway then formed the Nation of Scotland, and again I have no idea what the requirements are, or if they were changed in this patch. I spent 50 legitimacy on changing my Sinuliad, or Parliament, to an Estate Parliament, as the one I'd had the entire game so far, the Council Parliament, didn't allow the burghers to take part, and I quite like the burgher agendas for pushing societal values. When my parliament came up, I enacted 3 of their agendas to push me further towards free subjects, innovative and naval values. This, of course, pissed off my nobles, but while the parliament was ongoing, their satisfaction would raise by 1.2% a month, so it was pretty worth it. If I managed to get one event that raised my parliament support by 15%, then we'd be able to pass the parliamentary request for war without failing our overall task of expanding shipbuilding facilities, which would begin the construction of 3 discounted shipyards. Unfortunately, I didn't manage to get it, so I also accepted a noble agenda to push us closer to serfdom, which I didn't want, just so I could hit the 100 and get my claim on Tyrone. The war was nothing special, as they did only have 6 locations, but I do want to mention one thing, and that is how laborious and annoying transporting armies is. My naval levies, for whatever reason, down to a maximum of 3 boats, so I didn't bother raising them. And transporting my army from Britain to Ireland required me to split my army into 1.8k chunks, and then manually click the attach button for each section, then manually move the boats, and then manually move the boats back to pick up the next one. EU4 does it so much smoother, and while I know EU5 does have automatic transport system, it's so clunky and unresponsive compared to EU4. Also, if I have an army of 11,000 and I click the embark button, the game should automatically split my army up into small enough chunks to get one on the boat. Requiring me to do that first step is a step back from EU4. Either way, Tyrone was conquered, which is why I didn't really bother putting it on my lovely little map. And now the entirety of Ireland belonged to my vassal. Other than Orkney Island, the entirety of the British Isles was either directly owned by me or one of my vassals, so I checked on my formable requirements. Prydain was the only one visible, and to do it I either had to destroy England or make them my subject, as well as own directly 66 more locations. I guess that would come when I annexed my English vassals. I knew of one other formable that would become available to me after I annexed Northumbria, and that was Hen Ogledd. I wasn't sure how to do it, so I asked Pavia, one of the devs, who showed me the code for it. Essentially, I needed to own land in the north of England for it to become visible, so I made a mental note to check on that after Northumbria was annexed. Though I'm not gonna lie, I didn't really want to form anything. I really like my new flag. In 1608, another parliament rocked up, and this time I was able to get to 100 with ease. Burgher agendas are just so damn good. I decided to get the parliamentary claim on the remnants of England across the seas. Looked like we would end up with a sizable Canadian colony when all this was said and done. Plus, I wanted to see how the logistics of invading across another continent was. First though, naval build-up. I had 5,000 in the bank, so I built extra pinnaces to bring my light count to 50, and then another 3 carracks to bring me to 40 heavies, and then 20 galleys. Hopefully, next time we fought Castile, these galleys would be able to hold the line long enough for the carracks to get involved properly. With them all built, I got them all joined up in a single fleet and saw that my total carry capacity was 3,350. Not great. I queued up a few hulks too. I hadn't bothered researching the later tier transports, though they only had 200 troop capacity, but compared to the 25 or 50 of my other ships, it was night and day. These ships only cost 23 ducat a pop too, so I ordered 60 of them, which would be enough to transport one of my 12,000 man armies. For the journey across the Atlantic, I split the navy into 2 parts, as they were too large to go all as one, as they'd suffer a 40% movement penalty. I employed 2 admirals for my 2 30 hulk fleets, Eberhard von Erbstorff, who had 100 military skill, which would increase the movement speed by 20%, and Maskonomit Chekatolbut, a Native American with 94 military skill for 18.8% extra move speed. With that done, on the 1st of December 1610, they did nothing. Hulks are early tier boats, and they can't sail the open ocean. I would have to upgrade to brigs for that. So I reset all of my technology queue for it, as there's still no way to advance add an advance to the front of the queue. Ah well, at least for the next few years I would have a way to ship armies to Ireland easily if they had a rebellion they needed help with. Then, unfortunately again, I had a small rebellion spring up, and I was surprised to see that it only had a single location. It was swiftly dealt with, but the rebellion didn't end. Looking to the New World, I was horrified to see that my new colony in Bermuda and a few islands in the Western Caribbean, which I'd only just started settling, had joined the nobles' revolt. I did the only thing I could, split my army into 1,900 men, 2 regiments of arquebusiers and 1 heavy lancer. I boarded them on my carracks and sent them over the ocean. Only 40 men died in the crossing before we landed in Bermuda, but my fleet was utterly wrecked. 4 sunk while off the coast of the island, thankfully after my men had disembarked. Unfortunately, though, there was not enough food in Bermuda to feed even that many men, so they boarded the ships immediately and set sail for Gogleth Duane in the hopes of finding safe harbor in my Massachusetts colony. They managed to arrive before any more sank, but then, while docked, 2 more were lost. It seems like the hazardous waters penalty or a modifier that ticks down over time even after you get into safety. Hovering over the combat strength of my depleted ships, it said that they would not be getting repaired, as there was simply no naval supplies in the market with which to repair them with. Nor were the men there who had been lost reinforcing, as we lacked guns and horses. I really, really like this. It's very authentic, and it models the difficulties of sending an army across the ocean. It really makes you understand how it was that the most powerful empire on Earth could lose to an American revolution. My colonial efforts in the Caribbean, where half of the islands had rebelled, became its own colonial nation, and I named it Caribath, naturally. Biting the bullet and accepting that I would have to replace losses no matter what, I tried to Hail Mary it and sail my damaged fleet and depleted armies to the new colony, and I only lost a single ship getting there. The men, though, managed to reinforce back to 1900, as Castile had managed to set up a sizable colonial market in Puerto Real on Haiti, which my new colonial islands were a part of. My ships, too, could begin to be repaired at 10% a month. We were saved by the Castilians. Maybe they're not so bad after all, eh? With this miracle, we put down the rest of the rebellion and stuck around in a paradise for a few more months before bringing my army back to Massachusetts, ready for the invasion of England's last holdout. The original plan was to bring a full 12k stack to the New World, but that plan was completely scuppered, so I made do with 1.9k, hoping it would be enough, and I declared before my claim ran out. My army marched unopposed until I reached the capital of England's larger colony, Passamaquoddy, where I encountered a small force of 600 and a small fort with 50 garrison. I defeated the army with ease and assaulted the fort, losing around 100 men in the process. Moving further, I rounded the mouth of the St. Lawrence and started marching up the coast, meeting another army, this time of England itself, before the English capital. They had 900, and I lost another 300 defeating them. They could reinforce, was the issue, and I could not. I could beat every army they threw at me, but not forever. England's colonies, it seems, were disloyal. Not that I blame them, but that did mean I could sue them separately for peace. All of New Hampshire went to Goleth Duane, and Maine went to Alban Nuith. Quebec was split along the St. Lawrence, with the north going to Samau-Sintaf and the south to Alban Nuith. Another colony was set up in the Hudson Bay, named Bay Hudson. In 1617, a couple of things happened. Firstly, Oxford finished being integrated, so my population rose to 4.1 million. Looking at the breakdown, I also saw that we'd surpassed 1 million Welshmen, which is a huge milestone. Part of that was that I'd started assimilating Middlesex, where London was located, and now London itself was 27% Welsh from a total population of 81,000. The location just south of London had also renamed itself from Southwark to Treffibrennen? Something like that, as the Welsh population had overtaken that of the English. In time, I would do this to the entire island. Secondly, though, and something that may end up changing that population number, is that the bubonic plague made a comeback, appearing in London in November. My next Parliament debate came up in 1618, and I chose to get a claim on the Swedish colony of Shakamaksen, which controlled land all from New York to South Carolina. This time my transports had upgraded to brigs and were ready, so I transported 6,000 men to the New World, while the rest stayed home in Britain, and we declared. Norway would also take part in this war, so we did double dip and conquered Orkney for our vassal Scotland too. The war went predictably enough. The Shakamaksan colony did not have the ability to resist my professional army in any real capacity, and we marched in to seize the provincial capitals along the coast, while my colonial nations used their levies to do the same further inland. One interesting thing of note did happen though, and this is probably a direct response to something the Playmaker exposed in his Roman campaign. I marched on near Göteborg right before it finished raising its levies, and as I did that, the levies began to raise in a nearby location instead without losing any of the progress it had made while in near Göteborg. It seemed now it would be much harder to just snipe the levy raise locations to get an easy win over a superior foe caught unawares. By 1620, the entirety of Shakamaksan was occupied, though as they were loyal to Sweden, no separate peace could be signed, and I was only at 32% war score. I decided to take my combat navy and set it to the automated task of blockading enemy ports, wondering if I couldn't maybe get the Swedish war exhaustion high enough to submit. But unfortunately, this just made my navy sail back and forth between Göteborg and Stockholm on opposite sides of their country, and the war exhaustion gain was quite negligible. I embarked my forces back on the brigs and sailed them back to Europe, ready to invade Norway and Sweden. Our invasion of Norway began first, and we sailed 18,000 to their shores, sieging the forts of Skien and Lindesnes. Nailed it. We're a bit hampered, though, by the fact that my troops contracted the plague, so attrition was incredibly high. To get the war over quickly, I assaulted the forts of Sande and Oslo, their capital, and in the peace we took Orkney, the Shetlands, and the Faroe Islands, completing the conquest of Great Britain in all of its glory. At this point, hungry for peace, I sailed my army to Stockholm itself and laid siege to the Swedish capital. 12,000 men landed, and I lost 2,500 of them assaulting the fort, taking their capital. With that, I pieced out for 100 war score worth of New World territory, taking everything down to the province of Roanoke for an extra 540,000 hops. This, however, did not bring me back to my overall maximum, as the Black Death had claimed 876,000, bringing my number of Welsh pops back down below 1 million to 864,000. New York and everything north of the Hudson River was given to Gogledd Dwyrain, and everything south of it went to a new colonial nation I set up based out of Delaware, named Afforder y Dwyrain. In 1626, I got notice that Castile had reinforced the Treaty of London, that renamed Treaty of Tordesillas that we all cared super much about. But instead of it saying London, it now said Lundain, as the population had risen to 54% Welsh at 41,000 pops to the 35k English. 254 Englishmen were being assimilated every single month, and checking my culture tab, for the first time since 1337, Wales was below the maximum culture capacity, as English cost 3.68, whereas we had a max capacity of 3.83. And this was growing too, as it was due to the cultural recognition reform that I had started to implement, as we had lost access to the mining communities due to our societal values moving away from traditional economy. While this did mean I could keep English on the roster with no issues, I did still want to culture convert the land, so it would be unaccepted as soon as the last 3 vassals of Cambridge, Suffolk, and Essex were integrated. I did spy another problem though, and that was Anglicanism. Looking at my integrated map mode, everything to the east of Derby was majority Anglican, so I could only achieve the integrated status and not full cores. Full cores give plus 20% max control, plus 0.1% monthly control, and only allows primary and accepted cultures to grow. Whereas these half cores gave only 5% maximum control, and they slowed the assimilation speed by 10 per month, and they also gave 10 separatism. This became a new priority, so I changed my best military cabinet member, Stephen Collier, to convert province and started with Derby. They had 19,000 Catholics to 50,000 Anglicans, who would convert at a rate of around 500 a month. In 1628, my parliament came up again, so I decided to promote the state religion, which had a starting support of only 30%, but if I managed to pass it, it would increase my pop conversion speed by 25% for 10 years and convert 1,300 Anglicans in Lincoln to Catholic. It was relatively easy to get the support over 50% now that my burghers were so powerful, and the nobles wanted me to improve opinion with some random German, so I was able to recover most of the satisfaction they lost when I accepted the burgher agenda. Culture conversion goes faster when you have higher control, so I doubled up with my cabinet members. And while my Prime Minister Stephen extolled the virtues of the Pope, Patrick Barlow increased control. With both the increased control and passing the Parliament debate, the conversion rate shot up to over 1,000 a month, and by 1629 all of Derby had become majority Catholic and therefore fully cored. So my cabinet duo moved on to the next province over, Nottingham. The next few years passed without much incident. I continued to annex my English vassals and convert my lands to Catholic in order to integrate them. and other than a couple of rebellions in the colonies and Ireland that I helped put down, we were not having any trouble at all. In 1637, the golden age of piracy started, and I was a bit dismayed to see that to create a pirate subject nation would require nearly 7,000 ducats, which was a little bit out of our price range. The age of absolutism also started, and was honestly torn at which focus to go with. The admin focus looked great for the minus 10% proximity cost from centralized government, but Diplo looked great for the trade efficiency and trade capacity. But then military was also tempting, as it had manpower, discipline, infantry power, and army maintenance in there. In the end, I went with admin, as I wasn't too worried about my military being outmatched, and I felt the proximity would come into its own over the economic benefits from Diplo. Though I do think that in multiplayer, I'll probably be choosing mil focus in every game in this era. Finally, the Columbian Exchange also happened, and I began spreading cocoa into my Caribbean colonies. This costs 100 ducats and 5 prestige per good, and my prestige wasn't exactly stellar right now, so we could only move a couple before I was tapped. I noticed that I could also move tobacco to the island of Jersey, which I'd acquired as a vassal when full annexing England, as France is in a bit of a decent enough climate to grow it. I backed out from violating the Treaty of Lundain, as that was costing me 0.2 prestige per month, and the only reason we were in the negative. Finally, there was also a 2% chance every month for the court and country disaster to fire, which I was excited for, as I wanted to rid myself of some awkward noble privileges. In 1639, Essex was finally annexed, which was my last mainland English culture vassal. The land wasn't fully cored, of course, thanks to the religion qualifier, but I was making steady progress with fixing that situation, with only 15 locations to go before it was all sorted. As soon as that was done, the plan was to unaccept English and culture convert properly. Ideally, I would be able to become the cultural hegemon, but I was still just rank 15 Great Power with 761 points, and to get into the GP club, I'd need somewhere over 1,000. Of the countries I could see, the Mamluks were in 3rd place with 1,276 points, France in 4th with 1,157, and Castile was a secondary power in 8th place at 1,000 points. One of the biggest things that affected GP score was population scaled by control, and while a lot of my Welsh population was over in Wales, the majority of my country's pops were English and centred around Lundain. So I made the plan to move my capital to London, which would increase the control I had across my entire nation. One small issue, though, is that it would end up costing me 23,000 ducats, and I was making around 400 a month, and I saved up around about 11k at this point. But I was determined that this was the play to catapult me into the next stage of my game, so I held off on purchases and investments, and I started saving. In 1639, the court and country disaster fired, and I went with the absolutist path. Our estates all lost 50 satisfaction, I lost 50 stability. Immediately, I spent another 17 stability to revoke a noble privilege that pushed me towards aristocracy, as I wanted to go with plutocracy, and we sat at -1. To end the disaster, I would have to suffer for 10 years, then get my crown power above 60%, have fewer than 12 total privileges, and I currently had 23, and go to -80 absolutism societal value. No big deal then. I swapped a cabinet member to start pushing absolutism, and another to start pushing stability back up, and prepared myself to start losing money. The 11,000 I'd saved up for my capital would end up coming in handy to save myself from bankruptcy, as none of my estates were paying taxes except the burghers, who'd managed to stay above the 30 satisfaction limit. Though how long that would last as I started stripping away privileges was anyone's guess. My balance was -81 a month, and if the burghers stopped paying taxes, that would plummet by a further 430. I absolutely love this. This is so much more involved and interesting and stressful than the court and country disaster in EU4. Everything about this has just been improved so goddamn much. Fucking kudos to whoever worked on this. It's absolutely fantastic. To save some money, I closed my 135 armories, which saved around 120 ducats a month, and when my yeomen climbed over 30 satisfaction again, their tax payments resumed at 153 ducats. Not bad. In 1643, though, I came up with a devious plan. Firstly, by this point I had raised 20,000 ducats, but I didn't want to spend that much. I chose to develop the interior, as if you fail that you move towards naval, and I quite like naval. It also let me start a parliament at 58% support. Then I changed my law from royal court customs to itinerant court, which reduced the cost of moving my capital by 33%. This reduced my move capital cost to 17.5 thousand. But I wasn't done yet. Next, I stopped taxing my burghers and common folk, and reduced my minting to 0%. Cancelled all of my trades in London, so for 1 month I was down to 115 income, losing 640 ducats for a single month. which was an 850 ducat decrease on the previous month. It changed the cost of moving my capital by a further 15,000, and now is only 1,100 ducats to move the capital to London. So I did just that. Then I retaxed and reminted and passed a few parliament agendas, switched back to the balanced court. I did have to pay the nobles off 3,000 for some satisfaction, so I had enough from their agenda to get me over the hump, but here I was now with my capital in London, my laws as they should be, and sure, I was 54 stability in the negative, but I had 14,000 ducats in the bank. Hey, maybe I could afford a pirate vessel after all. It was only 2,000 now, so I created one in my little island in Cape Verde, Santiago, and I thought that maybe there could be a little bit of shenanigans going on with the trade coming from Africa. For what it's worth, this never happened, and I don't think I ever utilized them in any way whatsoever, so maybe that's something I could explore in a different campaign. In 1655, we finally achieved our aim of having all of England cored, as it was finally over 50% Catholic. But looking at our cultural makeup, we were already 36% Welsh. The culture conversion was going well. Plus, with court and country going on, the Little Ice Age, the wars of religion, and all that kerfuffle, we held back on oppressing the English. For now. We would definitely get to that in time, though. Promise. For now, though, I went and had a look at our court and country disaster and saw that all I needed to finish it was to reach 60.35% crown power, and I was currently at 54%. I embraced the Scientific Revolution Institution and rushed down to absolute rulership, which would increase my crown power by 50%. Surely this would be enough to prop us over. Before I got to that, though, I paid 2,000 ducats to the burghers to curb their power, reducing it by 20% for 5 years. This was only worth 1% crown power, though, but it didn't matter, because the burghers rose up against me, bringing my crown power to 60.46% and ending the disaster. Ironically enough, the end event says an end to hostilities between court and country, and yet the thing that had me win it was literally hostilities breaking out. Either way, the disaster was over, and I got around to re-adding my favourite privileges. My winning reward would be an increase in crown power from high legitimacy, but first we had to win our civil war, which was quite large. They had 2.5 million pops on their side, whereas I had just 2.1 million. Over half of our country had decided to rebel. But they didn't have 26,000 regulars hanging around in Britain, so victory was assured nonetheless. Again, rebellions in EU5 is something I do think need some work, and I do believe quite strongly that rebellions should start with their levies raised instantly, because otherwise you just have no issues whatsoever, and that's kind of not fun. In 1660, the unrest was over. It had taken much longer than Court and Country in EU4 for sure, but overall, honestly, it is so much more fun. As a bit of a reward, I swapped to centralization of power government reform. This required you to constantly be above 50 centralization and absolutism, and it increased my crown power by 20% and progress to centralization by 0.1. While my goal during the disaster was to have fewer than 12 privileges, we ended up afterwards with 2 for the nobles, 2 for the clergy, 3 for the common folk, and 10 for the burghers, for a total of 17. Unless more became available later on in the game, I was happy with this situation. Satisfaction-wise, other than the nobles, everyone was breaching the 50% satisfaction mark, and the nobles would likely get there after my legitimacy and stability got back up to where it needed to be, as we were at minus 19 stab and 48 legitimacy, which hurt their satisfaction quite a bit. In 1666, my queen died and King Stefan took the throne. He was a Brandenburger, and also came along with a personal union on Brandenburg. But unfortunately, he also came in with a new dynasty, and from hence on, Cymru would be ruled by the von Lublinitz family, or rather, Lubliniac, as I had Stephen embrace Welsh for 20 prestige. To go along with our ruler, another big development in Welsh cultural history happened on the 1st of May 1668, when we reached 2.409 million Welsh pops, which brought us higher than the English 2.402 million. We were finally the majority in our own country. In 1672, we got to 1,000 great power score, though again we couldn't see who was in first place to see what theirs was. I could see that Castile in 7th place had 1,188 and were a great power, and Hungary was in 8th place and had 1,140 and were not, so we had our target score to beat. There are a bunch of things that go into this score, but the ones I was most concerned with were army tradition and naval tradition, as I had 0 in both. With my economy now really booming, I began to drill my soldiers, which upped their maintenance significantly, but also raised my average army experience and thus also my army tradition. It wouldn't be quick, but there were points to gain here. For the Navy, drilling wasn't an option, but it was raised by war reps from other countries, which I found quite interesting. I didn't want to go to war right now, so I resigned myself to the idea that I would lag behind there. I was surprised to see that my maritime presence light fleet wasn't imparting anything to naval tradition though, nor was my 30 points towards naval societal value. And here is where I do an complaint. The economy was popping off, really quite hard now. With the increased taxes from my parliament, I was making 2.2k profit per month. I had also unlocked a bunch of really cool new buildings. Things like the Iron Foundry is an upgrade to the Tools Workshop. But the method of upgrading buildings really needs work. It is actually agony to deal with. Markets here were now outclassed twice. First by merchants' quarters, and now by grand marketplaces. But clicking on the grand marketplace to see where I could build it showed absolutely no sign whatsoever that any of the previous era buildings were in my country at all. Marketplaces, the Tier 1 1337 building was still my second most built building, despite being 2 centuries out of date. And that's all thanks to the really awkward way in which upgrading buildings is done. It has been reported, like, multiple times by multiple different creators. I truly hope it's updated before release, because I hate it. I hate it. It needs work. Anyway, in 1692, though, I finished the annexation of Northumberland, and after accepting Northumbrian culture for 0.38, I instantly cored the entire north, as they were all Catholics. It was at this point that I was again a bit dismayed to see no formable pop up for me, as unfortunately when I started this run, the only rules that were available were the default game rules, because of a bug in the game that prevented me from changing the game rules. This is why during this entire campaign I hadn't been looking down into like Greece and Anatolia, because it was called Byzantium, and I always change it to the Eastern Roman Empire because that's just a better name, but I couldn't. So honestly, it didn't really matter though, because there was a rebellion and it was mostly called Byzantion anyway. It was awful. I don't like looking down there. Anyway, due to the bug in the game, fantasy formables were disabled, so I couldn't form Hen Ogledd. I did get much closer to forming Prydain, though. That formable required me to own directly 176 locations on the island of Great Britain. I owned 174. It's a little bit strange that the formable wants you to own land in Scotland for it, but I guess I could just seize land. I took a save and seized Berwick and the Isle of Man, and despite what I have seen some claim, I did not instantly have these cored. I then formed Prydain. Map colour-wise, it was a deep blood red, much more rich than England or Great Britain for EU4, and our new flag was the same as the British flag, except the blue of Scotland was replaced with the black of Wales. So, map colour, upgrade, flag, downgrade, but I also gained access to a number of advances that I didn't have previously. Things like plus 25% tools output, 33% cloth output, both of which were huge, or 10% heavy ship power, 20% cultural tradition, or the Tier 6 unit Experimental Rifleman, which had 250% extra flanking range and 11 initiative on infantry, whereas the base regiment of that era was the Fusiliers, who had 100 flanking range and 1 initiative. This is 11 initiative versus 1 initiative is such an incredibly powerful difference. It is crazy. We were gonna tank the flag downgrade and take Prydain, so I never reloaded the save. I did, however, give Scotland back the land that I stole from them to do it. Unpausing, I got some more confirmation that this was the correct choice, as within a month I got my first dynamic historical event. Remember, Wales had a total of 3 of these, all related to Owen Glendower, back in 1390 to 1400-ish. Now I was seemingly getting the England/Great Britain DHEs, as they had the most in the entire game. This first one was about the Cotswold Olympic Games, and I spent 10,000 ducats to make it an annual event. Oh, don't you just love scaling costs? Some other DHEs popped up in the next few years, granting me famous characters like John Locke, Sir Isaac Newton, and Sir Christopher Wren, the latter of whom also came along with a unique building, the Grand Palace of Lundain. It wasn't all positive, though, as I also qualified for some of the unique English disasters, and in 1693 the English Civil War disaster fired, bringing in one of those characters of British history that I dislike the most, Oliver Cromwell. Though in this case, he was called Harry ap Rhys. Funnily enough, the flavortext telling me about the Civil War used the localization of my Welsh Parliament, instead of just calling it Parliament. So it read, "The English Civil War of 1642 to 1651 stemmed from conflicts between King Charles I and the Sinuliad over royal authority," which did tickle me a little bit. One event that struck early on in our civil war related to our subjects, where again we were hit with the pain of scaling costs by choosing between our subject of Alba losing loyalty or giving them 15,000 ducats. I didn't want to take any loans, and Alba was quite loyal at this time, so I took this 20-point hit. In 1701, the Civil War finally fired. I had various events leading up to it, both about my subjects and provinces choosing to back either myself or the parliamentarians, and on firing I could choose whether to side with the parliamentarians, which was the book option, or side with the royalists. Not wanting to side with the heinousness that was Oliver Cromwell, or this alternate universe's Welsh facsimile of him, I sided with the royalists, and a grand total of 5 locations rose up in revolt. They were put down within a month, with not a single battle fought. I suppose the disaster was called the English Civil War, and by this point there were only 1.4 million English in the entire country, making up around 23% of my population. But yeah, kind of disappointing on that one. After my Civil War, I had a DHE pop up talking about a crew of one of my ships that had been detained by the Castilians. They had mistreated them terribly, and even mutilated my captain by cutting off his ear. This was, of course, all about the War of Jenkins' Ear, which later merged into the Greater War of Austrian Succession in our timeline. But for now, what it gave me was a casus belli to use against Castile, though I didn't take it. It was an insult CB, and what I really wanted from Castile was colonial territory. This war goal would make it 50% more expensive to take, and I wanted to acquire the island of Haiti. With this CB, the island itself would be over 400 war score alone. So instead, what I did was start building a spy network, though unfortunately the only CB available to fabricate was Humiliate Rival, which obviously wasn't going to help. I waited until 1708 and used my parliament to get a claim on Magua province and declared. I felt my navy was strong enough to compete, as Castile only had 15 heavy ships, though I had no idea how many galleys they had. My own combat fleet was made up of 40 heavies and 60 galleys. I would use this war to catapult my way into great power status, and I stood now in 10th place with 1,300 points. The lowest GP I could see was Hungary, at only 1,400 points. I was only 100 behind now. Castile itself was sitting in 6th place at 1,558, and I could see their points from income were at just 165, whereas mine was at 200. We had the stronger economy. Where I was falling behind, it seems, was in subjects. Colonialism is incredibly important for GP score, it seems. Anyway, to the war. Haiti was my goal for 2 main reasons. The gold mine of Bani, and the gold mine of Magua. I was absolutely starved for gold, and finding it difficult to supply my buildings that required it, like the aforementioned Grand Palace of Lundain. Castile, though, would supply it. Colonially, Castile owned from Florida to the Rio Grande, and from Guatemala to Panama. Interestingly, the natives in Mexico had managed to survive, and there was a large Mayan state thriving, or barely holding on. One can never really tell. I had preemptively moved my army to the Caribbean and had them stationed on the island of AA. When I tried to get them to invade Haiti, they were met by a small fleet of Iberian heavies, and we lost 4 boats. Thankfully, I had redundancies in this navy, so I didn't lose any troops, so we retreated ready to try again. My main navy had been set to automatically hunt enemy navies around Iberia, but with the strength of my navy compared to theirs, it was a little bit overkill. So I split it in half and sent 50 warships to the New World to aid my transports. While I waited for them to arrive, I took another gamble and invaded the island of Puerto Rico, successfully landing my troops and occupying the island without resistance. The reinforcing fleet soon arrived, and I transported the army to the eastern edge of Haiti. Invading this island in EU5 is such a different experience than in EU4, as there are 34 locations on the island, and there's impassable terrain and choke points and all of that involved. I'm constantly in awe of just how detailed this map is and how much closer to the world I feel when I play. Anyway, glazing aside, I did have some resistance to my landing, as the Viceroyalty of Marion, the name of Castile's colony, had come to fight. They were no match for me, of course, but again, I would not be reinforcing this army until they went back to Britain, so any losses I took were essentially permanent for the duration of the war. Colonial wars in EU5 multiplayer are going to have such a massively different dynamic to EU4's because of this. Along with their 34 locations, this island had 13 forts. This campaign was started on a patch where fort maintenance could be set to 0, so the AI overbuilt forts like crazy. That was now fixed in my version, but the remnants of that issue remain, and the AI did not delete the excesses. Thankfully, I did have cannons, and the sieges weren't too slow, with 24-day siege ticks being the norm. I got through a couple of forts before I saw Scotland come to join me, landing 12,000 on the island and starting some sieges of their own. One thing I was both dismayed and happy to see was the presence of a star fort. It had been reported that the AI was not prone to upgrading their castles, but this star fort proved that this had been solved. But, unfortunately, this is where I will leave this video now, and also this series of AARs. On the 1st of May, 1710, my game crashed. Loading up the autosave in January, running through again, I crashed on the exact same day. I reported it naturally, and Lath, Mr. John Paradox Jr. himself, even took the save and tried to play himself. He did manage to get past the 1st of May with a large hiccup in performance, and then pass the save back to me, but I just ended up crashing on the 1st of November instead. So, I never managed to become a great power. But I will talk about what I did manage to accomplish. Our tax base was at 6,281 ducats, giving us an income of 4,750. 1,700 of that was from trade, 516 from minting, despite our lack of gold, of course. And in taxes, I gained 50 from the nobles, 1,265 from the burghers, and 1,050 from the commoners. My vassals and colonies granted me 153 per month in tribute, with the largest portion coming from Alba at 65 ducats. Expenses-wise, we spent 2,618 ducats, 117 on our court, 440 on our army of 56,400 troops, and 440 on our navy of 40 heavies, 60 galleys, 50 lights, and 60 transports. 30 ducats were spent on fort maintenance, 261 on culture investment, and a whopping 773 on diplomatic spending. 100 on stability, 420 on food, and 10 on diplomacy, as I was throwing subsidies at my colonies. Overall, that gave me a balance of 2,130 ducats. The most valuable market in the world was Cologne, at 38,000 ducats, with Nuremberg in second at 30,000, and Genoa in third at 26,000. Our own Lundain market was down in 8th place at 14.5k value passing through it. Our market was, however, the leading producer of lead, naval supplies, tin, and wool, which absolutely makes sense when you consider that all of those are needed for building a strong fleet, and, well, I am imitating Britain at this point. Population-wise, we ended up with a total pop of 6.5 million, with 4.3 million of that being Welsh, 1.3 million being English, 783,000 being Northumbrian, 61 Cornish, 11,000 Irish, with a smattering of other irrelevantly small cultures thrown in too. Before I talk about culture though, my subjects, the largest of my vassals, was Ireland at 2.1 million, Alba at 1.7 million, and then my colony of Alban Nuith at 1.5 million. None of the others broke a million mark. Now, I know culture conversion has been a bit of a hot topic lately, but let me give my opinion. Getting to 66% Welsh in my country was, in my opinion, a great achievement, and the balance of how fast one can culture convert is done quite nicely. As long as you really focus on getting your cultural influence up over the tradition of the culture you're converting, and then you have to spend your valuable cabinet members on the task, then speed feels about right for the cost. Letting culture change passively results in much different outcomes. Maybe the AI could be better at pushing their culture though, as Welsh ended up in the game as the most influential culture in the world at 3,571 points, with Francian being in second place with 2,227 and Castilian in third with 1,722. The main reason that I chose to play Wales was because of the localization of the British Isles all having a Welsh version, and I have shared a few of those with you. Unfortunately, I didn't manage to get the full culture conversion of the Isles, or even just of Britain, as English was still the majority in much of Western Mercia. But a few of my favourites. Winchester is now named Wintier, Dover is now Dofr, Bristol is now Brist, Buckingham became Bruchnaug, and Oxford became Rishiden. These localization changes really made the effort of culture conversion, which actually didn't really give me any practical benefits at all, as when I have England as a positive cultural opinion of me, it gives plus 5% pop satisfaction in all of the English pops, whereas Welsh had no modifier whatsoever. But it's still worth it for the roleplay, for the immersion, and just for the fun of it. I will leave you with these final thoughts about this campaign. We started it in a patch where it was not practically, but like literally impossible to succeed. And we did have to use the console to make the run possible. That, due to this campaign, has been fixed, and now people are free to experience what has been my most fun campaign in EU5 to date when the game releases in a little over a month's time. there are things that still irritate me about the game, as I think I've pointed out quite well. Though most of these are the lack of quality of life features and the UI shenanigans that I'm hoping will be ironed out shortly. But overall, I was having an absolute blast, and now the issues are solved, I really do recommend it. I have thoroughly enjoyed making this series, and I will be doing more, and I have got a little bit more free time now than I did when I first started this AAR, so maybe I'll get one last one in. Let me know in the comments which country you think that should be as. Thank you ever so much for watching, for enjoying, and for supporting this series and me in general. Subscribe button's there if you want to help out further. Consider using my affiliate code in the description and pinned comment. And until next time, Diolch am wylio a farwelio. Bye-bye.